May 14, 2026. Beijing, the Temple of Heaven. Two of the most powerful men on Earth are standing side by side in front of one of the most recognizable landmarks in the world. A reporter shouts a question about Taiwan. Donald Trump, a man who has never been shy about expressing an opinion on anything, goes quiet. He says nothing. Xi Jinping stands beside him, composed, unhurried. That silence lasted only a few seconds. But those who study the relationship between these two countries will tell you it said more than anything either man put on the record during the entire two-day summit. Trump flew to Beijing with a list of things he wanted. China buying American soybeans, Boeing aircraft orders, a commitment that Xi would help pressure Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a deal on Nvidia chips, and some kind of reassurance on Taiwan. Xi had his own list. Taiwan at the top, everything else below it. When Air Force One lifted off from Beijing Capital Airport on May 15th, both leaders called the summit a success. Both sides said they delivered. But here is the question that the headlines are not answering. What was actually agreed to? What was left deliberately vague? And what does the silence on Taiwan tell us about where the balance of power between these two countries actually stands right now? I'm Grant Williams. This is the Williams Perspective, and today we are going through the Beijing summit, not the version that each side's press office released, but the version that the evidence, the body language, the omissions, and the documented record actually support. To understand what happened in Beijing, you first need to understand the context that brought both leaders to the table, because this summit was not supposed to happen in May. It was originally scheduled for April. Then Iran changed everything. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a coordinated military campaign against Iranian missile forces, naval assets, and nuclear infrastructure. The war that followed consumed the attention of the entire U.S. national security apparatus for the next 2.5 months. The Beijing summit was pushed back. Trump was managing a war. Trade negotiations went on hold. The carefully prepared agenda, soybeans, Nvidia chips, Boeing contracts, Taiwan arms sales, all of it sat waiting while U.S. aircraft flew over Iranian airspace and U.S. destroyers patrolled the Strait of Hormuz. But the war also added something new to the agenda, something neither side had fully anticipated. China was buying roughly 40% of its oil imports through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's decision to close that waterway after the U.S.-Israeli strikes disrupted Chinese energy supply chains in ways that Beijing had not fully prepared for. China had strategic oil reserves. It had been diversifying its sources. But the closure of Hormuz created real economic pressure. Not immediately catastrophic, but persistent and accumulating. That gave Trump something to work with. And it gave Xi a reason to be at the table on Iran, not because Beijing particularly wanted to pressure Tehran, but because an open Hormuz serves Chinese economic interests regardless of what it does for Washington. At the same time, the run-up to the summit had exposed the deep contradictions in China's position. U.S. intelligence had documented Chinese satellite companies providing imagery to Iran for strike planning against U.S. bases. U.S. intelligence assessed that China was preparing man-pad missile shipments to Iran. The U.S. State Department sanctioned 3 Chinese satellite firms on May 8th, 5 days before Trump landed in Beijing. Trump arrived in China carrying sanctions he had just imposed on Chinese companies, intelligence files documenting Chinese support to Iran, and a suspended $13 billion arms sale to Taiwan that he had agreed not to finalize before the summit. That last point matters. Before his plane touched down, Trump had already made a significant concession. The arms package to Taiwan, approved by Congress, was quietly put on hold. No announcement, no press conference, just a decision not to sign it. And then he landed, stood next to Xi at the Temple of Heaven, and said nothing when asked about Taiwan. That is how this summit began. Xi Jinping opened the substantive discussions with a message that was, by the standards of diplomatic symmetry, remarkably direct. Taiwan, he said, is the most important issue in U.S.-China relations. He did not say it gently. He said, and this is drawn from official English-language Chinese state media, that if the United States and China handle Taiwan badly, the two countries risk collision or conflict. Those words, collision or conflict, are not diplomatic softening. They are a warning delivered in person to the President of the United States at the start of a state visit. One analyst at the Australian National University, Sung Wen-Ti, described what happened next in terms that deserve to be quoted carefully. He said Xi felt he had a license to make discordant warnings seemingly without concern about blowback or displeasure from Trump's side. He appeared tough in public in front of Trump and got away with it. Trump's response to Xi's Taiwan warning was notably muted. Secretary of State Marco Rubio scrambled to reassure reporters that U.S. policy on Taiwan was unchanged. But the optics, the image of Trump standing silently while Xi laid down the law, circulated globally. China's foreign ministry readout of the summit placed Taiwan first. Iran barely appeared in it. The official Chinese statement on Iran did not assign any blame for the conflict to the United States. It did not address the Iranian naval blockade, and it made no public commitment that Beijing would pressure Tehran to reopen the strait. What China's foreign ministry said, in full, on Iran was this: China believes that a comprehensive ceasefire is of utmost urgency, that resuming hostilities is even less acceptable, and that adhering to negotiations is particularly important. Read that sentence carefully. It does not say China will pressure Iran. It does not say China supports the U.S. position. It says both sides should keep talking and not restart the war. That is a position any country could hold regardless of which side it actually supports. And then China's statement added something that is easy to miss. China supports Iran in safeguarding its national sovereignty and security. In a summit where Trump was trying to get China to pressure Iran, Beijing's official position, released the same day, included a statement of support for Iranian sovereignty. That is the diplomatic record of what China committed to on Iran, which is to say, very little. Trump came to Beijing with a clear economic agenda, and he left with what appeared on the surface to be significant wins. 200 Boeing aircraft. That was the headline number Trump touted immediately after the summit, telling reporters, and I'm paraphrasing here, that's a lot of jobs. A commitment from China to purchase a double-digit billion-dollar order of American agricultural products over the next 3 years, according to U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. A deal allowing the sale of Nvidia's advanced AI-powered semiconductor chips to Chinese buyers, reversing an export control that had been a major point of friction. And Xi's agreement to visit the United States in September, a follow-up summit at the White House set for the 24th. These are real outcomes. Particularly the Nvidia deal, which has direct implications for American technology companies and for the broader trajectory of U.S.-China competition in artificial intelligence. But each of these outcomes requires a significant caveat: the Boeing order. China is simultaneously rolling out its own domestically produced C919 passenger aircraft with considerable fanfare. The Chinese aviation market is not going to absorb 200 Boeing jets quickly or easily. And China has a documented pattern of announcing large purchase commitments at summits that subsequently fail to materialize at anything close to the headline figure. In October 2025, China committed to purchasing 25 million metric tons of American soybeans annually through 2028. It is already significantly below that figure, buying cheaper Brazilian alternatives instead. The agricultural commitment faces the same credibility question. A double-digit billion-dollar order is a number. Whether it becomes a reality depends on Chinese government purchasing decisions over 3 years. Decisions that Beijing can slow, redirect, or quietly abandon without formally breaking any agreement. The Nvidia deal is more tangible, but it also represents a significant policy reversal from the position that U.S. national security officials had previously argued was essential to maintaining American technological leadership over China. And then there is Iran. Trump said Xi told him China would not give Iran military equipment. He described it as a big statement, said strongly. But here is what the record shows. Xi's commitment on Iran was delivered verbally in a private meeting, reported by Trump himself to Fox News' Sean Hannity. It does not appear in China's official foreign ministry readout of the summit. There is no joint statement, no written commitment, no verification mechanism. A verbal assurance delivered privately by the leader of a country whose satellite companies were sanctioned 5 days earlier for providing Iran with intelligence used to target American troops. Newsweek noted it directly: China's decision to exclude the Iran issue from its readout and add nothing to Trump's own statements means there has been no public commitment from Xi that Beijing would try to influence Iran or take a direct hand in negotiations. Now let's talk about what may be the most consequential unresolved issue from this entire summit. Taiwan? One company, TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, produces approximately 92% of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips. The other 8% is made in South Korea. If you own a smartphone, a laptop, a modern car, a military aircraft, or virtually any piece of advanced electronic equipment manufactured in the last decade, the chips inside it almost certainly pass through Taiwan. This is not an abstract geopolitical point. It is a physical supply chain fact with direct implications for every American manufacturer, every American consumer, and every branch of the U.S. military. Gordon Chang, a senior fellow and China analyst, put it plainly on Fox News in the hours after Trump landed back in Washington. One Taiwan company makes 92% of the world's semiconductors. The other 8% is made in Korea. If the US wants a future with semiconductors, we'll have to defend Taiwan. Xi's position on Taiwan at the summit was not subtle. He called it the most important issue in US-China relations. He warned it could lead to collision or conflict. He framed Taiwan's eventual unification with China as a historical inevitability. Before the summit, Beijing had pressed the Trump administration to scale back its security commitments to the island and revise US official policy. There had been reports that China was seeking to link any cooperation on the Iran situation, including pressure on Iran to reopen Hormuz, to US concessions on Taiwan. What Trump said in response was, on its own terms, carefully hedged. He told reporters he made no commitment either way on the pending arms sale to Taiwan. He said he would decide after speaking to, and again I'm drawing on his exact reported words, the person that right now is running Taiwan. Secretary of State Rubio was more direct. U.S. policy on Taiwan, he said on the record, is unchanged as of today and as of this meeting. But policy statements and operational decisions are different things. The $13 billion arms package to Taiwan, approved by Congress sitting on Trump's desk, was suspended before the summit began. Not canceled. Suspended. There has been no announcement of when it will be signed. One analyst, Bonnie Glaser of the German Marshall Fund, said ahead of the summit that any rhetorical softening from Trump, even ambiguous, would be the most destabilizing outcome of the meeting. The outcome was ambiguous. The silence at the Temple of Heaven was ambiguous. The suspension of the arms sale is ambiguous. For Taiwan, and for the countries in the Indo-Pacific that calibrate their security decisions based on the credibility of the American commitment to the island, ambiguity is its own kind of answer. Here is the larger picture that this summit points toward, and it is a picture that goes well beyond the specific outcomes of 2 days of meetings in Beijing. A piece in Time magazine, published the day Trump left China, made an observation that I think deserves careful attention. It noted that even before Trump arrived, he had already made significant concessions, agreeing to sell Nvidia chips, suspending the Taiwan arms sale, and it described the summit's most enduring image as the two leaders standing outside the Temple of Heaven, with Trump remaining tight-lipped as reporters asked whether Taiwan had been discussed. The piece argued that Xi felt empowered to lay down the law from the start of the meeting, that he appeared tough in public in front of Trump and got away with it, and that this projects a particular image of shifting power, not because China has solved its domestic problems, which are considerable, but because of how China has positioned itself through this crisis. China's economy has real structural weaknesses. Its property sector is in a prolonged crisis. Consumer demand is weak. Youth unemployment is near 19%. GDP growth has slowed to around 5%. And yet at this summit, it was China that opened with the stinging rebuke on Taiwan. China, whose foreign ministry readout made no substantial commitment on Iran. China that enacted a blocking statute telling its companies to ignore American sanctions. China that sold a reconnaissance satellite to Iran's Revolutionary Guard while publicly calling for peace. And it was the United States that suspended a Taiwan arms sale before the summit began. That accepted a verbal assurance on Iran with no verification mechanism. That agreed to lift Nvidia export restrictions that U.S. national security officials had previously argued were essential. One economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit, UASU, offered a measured assessment. She said both sides had delivered, there was goodwill at least, but there was no substantive discussion on Taiwan. She also noted there are limits to what China can realistically do on Iran, since Tehran is operating in survival mode and will prioritize its own interests above all else. That last point matters. Even if Xi genuinely wanted to pressure Iran, and the evidence suggests Beijing has been carefully hedging rather than genuinely mediating, Tehran's decision-making is ultimately its own. Iran did not enter this war because China told it to. It will not exit the war because China tells it to. What China can do is make Tehran's economic situation more or less difficult. It buys the bulk of Iran's sanctioned oil. It provides the financial infrastructure that allows Iran to operate outside the dollar system. It has supplied the satellite intelligence that gave Iran targeting capability during the war. Whether Beijing chooses to use those levers, and whether it expects something from Washington in return for doing so, is the real negotiation that this summit set in motion. And that negotiation will continue long after the cameras in Beijing have packed up. Let me pull this out of the diplomatic and strategic layer and connect it directly to your daily life. First, oil prices. The Strait of Hormuz remains a central pressure point. Approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it. China imports roughly 40% of its oil through that waterway. If China genuinely uses its leverage to push Iran toward a ceasefire that reopens Hormuz, and that is still an if, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has publicly projected that oil prices could fall significantly on the other side of a successful resolution. At the pump, that translates to relief from the current national average of $4.52 a gallon. For a family driving a typical vehicle, the difference between $4.52 and $3 a gallon across a year of normal driving is several $100s. That is not abstract. That is grocery money. That is utility bills. That is the economic arithmetic of what happens in the Strait of Hormuz. Second, semiconductors. The Nvidia chip deal Trump announced in Beijing allows the sale of advanced AI semiconductors to Chinese buyers. For American technology companies, that is revenue. For American workers in that sector, it matters. But the national security calculation that the previous export controls were designed to address has not changed. China's military is modernizing at significant speed. AI capabilities are central to that modernization. The chips that power AI systems are exactly what those controls were designed to restrict. Whether the economic benefit of opening that market outweighs the security cost of accelerating Chinese AI development is a question that serious people disagree about. What is not in question is that this is a real trade-off, not a free win. Third, Taiwan. Gordon Chang's observation on Fox News is worth sitting with. One company makes 92% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. If China were ever to take control of Taiwan, by force or through political pressure, that supply chain does not simply relocate. It does not move to Ohio in 6 months. It disappears, or it comes under Chinese control. Every advanced weapons system the U.S. military operates runs on chips. Every smartphone, every car built after 2010? The global economy runs on Taiwanese semiconductor production in a way that most people have never had to think about because it has never been disrupted. The suspended arms sale to Taiwan, the silence at the Temple of Heaven, the ambiguity in Trump's post-summit statements. These things matter, not because war with China is imminent, but because the credibility of the American commitment to Taiwan is itself a deterrent. And deterrence depends on clarity, not ambiguity. Let's bring this into focus. Here is what the documented record of the Trump-Xi summit actually shows. Trump arrived in Beijing having already suspended a $13 billion arms package to Taiwan. He accepted a verbal assurance from Xi that China would not supply Iran with military equipment, an assurance that does not appear in China's official summit readout and carries no verification mechanism. Xi opened the meeting with a direct warning on Taiwan, calling it the most important issue in the relationship and saying mishandling it could lead to collision or conflict. That warning is now on the record. China made no public commitment to pressure Iran. Its foreign ministry statement supported Iranian sovereignty in the same document that called for reopening Hormuz, a contradiction it chose not to resolve. Trump got commitments on Boeing orders, agricultural purchases, and Nvidia chips, all of which have meaningful economic value and all of which carry significant asterisks about whether they will materialize at the promised scale. Xi got an invitation to the White House in September. He got the suspension of the Taiwan arms sale. He got the Nvidia concession, and he got a 2-day summit in which he set the tone from the first closed-door session. One final question for you. The summit produced friendly photographs, mutual praise, and a follow-up meeting scheduled for September. But the Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Iran is still at war. The Taiwan arms sale is still unsigned. China's satellite companies are still sanctioned. The intelligence file on Chinese support to Iran has not changed. What actually changed in Beijing? Was this a genuine turning point in one of the most consequential relationships in the world? Or was it a successful exercise in managing the appearance of progress while the underlying competition continues exactly as before? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one of them. This has been the Williams Perspective. I'm Grant Williams.